I gotta say, Dopey, you killed it with this recommendation. What is going on, everybody? The Real Sharif M here, aka Manganese Steel, with a little bit of a different video. I know I say that kind of in most of my videos, but that's also because I try to tackle different subjects and different segments of the market in most of my videos, at least. And in this particular one, I am going to show you guys a what I consider budgetary knife that genuinely impressed me. Now, the recommendation for this knife came from community member and just homie by the name of Dopey. If you guys know him, he's a frequent member in most of the lives, and just in general, good dude. And he suggested this knife to me for a current project that I'm working on. I recently licensed a couple of designs to KIZER, and one of them featured their clutch lock mechanism. And I needed to basically do what's called benchmarking, where you take a product from a competitor or even internally your own company, and you take measurements and dimensions off of it in order to understand best practices in design. So Dopey recommended to me, out of all of the KIZERs that use their clutch lock mechanism, that I pick up the KIZER Escort. And I gotta say, Dopey, you killed it with this recommendation. So why do I like this knife so much? Well, there are a number of reasons. Basically, it starts here at the blade. This is a good drop point. This really is. If you're gonna get one, I highly recommend this one. It has a nice large primary bevel, flat ground, comes to a nice edge termination, has this fuller on top, which is really like a nice aesthetic detail. And this thing isn't overly tapered. It actually maintains a fair amount of blade thickness till the tip. So this thing is fairly robust while being fairly thin. I hope you guys can see that clearly in the video. So this thing is actually fairly usable. It's not going to be overly delicate. You get a nice balance of a sort of thicker section in the base of the blade, and then it tapers out quite nicely. So it's a really well judged blade design. And then you combine with that these very neutral ergos from the handle with jimping here, and jimping here. Now, it's not overly aggressive jimping, but it is nice to have some traction surfaces that have been integrated into the handle. Speaking of the handle, the scales are done out of green burlap micarta, which isn't my favorite aesthetically speaking, but the texture on these is actually quite nice and has offered a fair amount of grip, where some micartas can get a little kind of slippery at times with use. These burlap micarta ones seem to really still offer a fair amount of traction, even if your hands start to get a little sweaty, which has impressed me genuinely. Now, with the KIZER clutch locks, I'm sure you guys, this is not the first time you're seeing something about them, but if you didn't know, they are one of the few crossbar sort of locking mechanisms that offer adjustability. If you take the scales off, there are actually 5 positions where you can adjust the tension on the Omega spring, which is phenomenal, because my number one complaint always with Benchmade products is that their tension on the Omega spring is so weak that the action feels really mushy. And believe it or not, the Bug Out is the only one in the entire lineup that feels nice and snappy because the blade is so light. The second you start getting into a thicker blade and a heavier blade stock in general, maybe something that is, you know, 1200s, I don't know, American or freedom units when it comes to designing knives. But when you start getting into a 3.5 or even 4mm blade and it's not doing an aggressive taper, you still have a lot of blade mass. And when you do use that with a Benchmade, it's just like you got to throw wrist at it for the thing to frickin' open up. But not so with this guy. This thing fires out with authority and consistency, and it's really, really nice to use. One of the other things that's pretty dang genius about how they did the construction of this is, I'd love to show you, but I'm a little lazy to film it. But essentially, if you remove your pivot screw and your body screw right here, the steel liners still are connected. There is actually a hidden screw right here, that actually keeps, if you notice, there's two standoffs. So that hidden screw on each side keeps the liners still attached. So if you want to make adjustments to the pivot tension or the crossbar tension, you can, without having to disassemble the whole thing completely, which is really cool. This does come at a little bit of a convenience sacrifice for the pivot, because in order to really achieve like good centering, you have to tighten both sides, but the pivot is captured in this particular case. So they've done a lot of really good thinking here, especially for a knife at this price point. I have to say, I'm genuinely impressed by this Escort. And I have to give props to Dopey for making this recommendation. It's been very, very satisfying for me to carry and use, and seeing how KIZER resolved some of these issues. I have to say they did their homework. They've done it well, and this thing is quite nice. Also, if I hadn't mentioned it, no, I haven't mentioned it, the scales are contoured, which is an even nicer surprise, especially on a knife at this price point. If you look here, let's see if we can get it to show up. You should be able to see that there is contouring to the scales, which really, again, took me by surprise, along with just the nice neutral ergos, the really well-judged blade, and the like traction surfaces that they put in, the little bit of jimping that they put into the liners. I mean, this thing falls into the hand really gracefully, really nicely, and just is a pleasure to use. I haven't had what I would consider a budget knife that is this nice to use maybe since my Ontario Rat, which for me says a lot, honestly. And with this thing running on bearings, I mean, this thing just, again, if you're a fidgeter, this fidgets for sure. Now, as you know about me, I'm not huge about fidgeting with knives, but what I am particularly picky about is pocket clips. I have a rule that I pretty much only like, milled pocket clips. I'm really big about them. And the main reason I'm very big about them is because of their height. And it's not something that I intimate too much, but I'm I'm crazy about the height of pocket clips. And my rule almost across the board is that a pocket clip should not exceed 4 millimeters of height. When it begins to go beyond 4 millimeters, you start to feel it in the hand, and it has the potential of creating a hot spot. With milled pocket clips, you can go nice and thin, like this one does on this WE Knives Blackout, right? You don't get a lot of surface area making contact with the palm, and with the height, there's no risk of this really digging into your hand. It just kind of melds into your overall grip. A horrible example of how to do pocket clips and how way too many manufacturers do pocket clips nowadays is like this one from KUBEY right now. This is unfortunately on my design collaboration with them called the Merced, and I've told them that this pocket clip is too tall. This thing is in excess of 6 millimeters in overall height, and for such a sleek design, this thing sticks out like a sore thumb. Looks nice here, horrible from this perspective. And it is not nice in the hand. Actually, this whole backside right here, I can feel in my palm, which is for me just not pleasant. I'm not a fan of it. And they used to have a lower profile pocket clip, which they, for some reason, decided to stop using. That's just completely absent of any logic for me. Not so with the KIZER, however. Look at this guy. This is probably the best bent steel pocket clip I have experienced in a long time. It's so minimal, so small. It's only about 4 millimeters in height, and this thing disappears in my hand. I have to really shift my grip around to really feel it. And most of the time, I do not notice it at all. So, really, when I say this is one of the better budgetary knives I have encountered since my rat, I genuinely mean it. You have a really, really nice blade, contoured handle scales in micarta. You have a crossbar lock, which, if you guys don't know, which you should know, is a very robust and very trustworthy locking mechanism. Then on top of it, you have nice jimping all throughout, and you have this nice low profile pocket clip. I mean, dudes, this thing impressed. This thing 100% impressed. And I gotta give a huge thumbs up to KIZER for this guy. And in truth, I am really going to keep this and carry it. I tend to be, in some scenarios, a little snobbish about my carry because I have these rules. Like, it has to have nice, you know, feeling in the hand from the scales. It has to have a low profile pocket clip. As I said, usually I prefer, you know, milled titanium low profile ones, and, you know, a good usable steel, which sometimes you just don't get on budgetary knives. But this actually ticks all of my boxes at an affordable price point. I mean, dude, like, the only thing that this could have done differently is maybe be in titanium. Maybe. I don't even know that it needs that. This is well done, guys. This is genuinely well done. So, if you guys haven't checked it out, give the KIZER Escort a shout.